I never thought I'd live to see the day when everything I built would be reduced to splinters and mud. For 42 years, I worked that land in southern Louisiana. Every furrow, every fence post, every nail in the barn, my hands had touched it all. The Broussard family farm wasn't just acreage and crops. It was the story of my life, written in sweat and calluses. Hurricane Elaine wasn't supposed to be the one that ended it all. We'd weathered plenty before. Category 2, they said at first. Then 3. By the time they called for mandatory evacuation, the roads were already flooding. I sent Martha ahead with our neighbor while I stayed behind to secure what I could. Maybe that was pride. Maybe stubbornness. Doesn't much matter now. I remember standing on my porch as the wind bent the cypress trees like they were made of rubber. The sky turned a color I can't even describe. Not quite green, not quite black. Something angry and ancient. When the levee broke, it wasn't with a crack but a sigh, like the earth itself had given up. I barely made it to the attic before the water took the first floor. For 2 days, I listened to my home being torn apart beneath me. The cracking of timber, the vacuum-like rush of water, the tinkling of glass. Each sound was a piece of my life breaking away. By the time rescue crews found me, there was nothing left but the roof I was sitting on and a lifetime of memories floating in the brown water. The emergency shelter was chaos, cots lined up like cemetery plots, children crying, old folks staring into nothing. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Insurance would come through, FEMA would help, the community would rebuild. But when I finally got back to assess the damage, reality hit harder than the storm. The farmhouse my grandfather built was gone, not damaged, not fixable, simply gone, with only the concrete steps leading to nothing but mud. The fields were buried under 2 feet of silt and debris. The irrigation system, the equipment, the barn, all gone. Insurance would cover some, but with the deductible and the act of God clauses, it wouldn't be enough to start over, not at my age. Martha couldn't stop crying when she saw it. 53 years of marriage, and I'd never felt so helpless beside her. We'll figure it out, I told her, though I had no idea how. We stayed with our neighbor Phil for 2 weeks, sleeping on a pull-out sofa that creaked every time one of us turned over. That's when I thought of Daniel, our son, our only child. He'd done well for himself, moved up to Virginia after college, married a nice girl named Rebecca, had 2 children we rarely saw. He worked in tech or finance or something that required a suit. We'd always been different, him and me. He wanted classrooms. I wanted open sky. He sought security. I valued independence. But blood is blood, and in times like these, family is all that matters. We should call Daniel, Martha said one night, her voice small in the darkness of Phil's living room. He'd want to know how bad it is. We're not charity cases, I said, though my pride was about all I had left. He's our son, Thomas. He'd want to help. I knew she was right. The following day, I swallowed what was left of my dignity and made the call. Daniel seemed concerned, asked about insurance, about FEMA assistance. He sounded like he was checking boxes, but I told myself he was just being practical. That's how he'd always been. "Why don't you and Mum come stay with us for a while?" he said finally. "Just until you figure things out. We have the guest room." The relief in Martha's eyes when I told her made my own eyes sting. We packed what little we had salvaged. Some clothes, our important papers, the photo albums Martha had taken with her during the evacuation, and my father's pocket watch that had somehow survived in the waterlogged dresser drawer. The drive to Virginia took almost 15 hours, with Martha navigating and me gripping the steering wheel of our old Ford truck, the only possession that had escaped the flood by virtue of being parked on higher ground at the evacuation center. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? Everything behind us was gone, and everything ahead was uncertain. It was nearly dusk when we pulled into the subdivision where Daniel lived, rows of identical 2-story houses with manicured lawns and SUVs in the driveways. His house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, larger than the others, with a 3-car garage and one of those fancy doorbell cameras. I felt out of place. Before I even stepped out of the truck, my work boots caked with Louisiana mud that seemed sacrilegious on the clean concrete driveway. Martha squeezed my hand before we approached the door. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though which one of us she was trying to convince I couldn't say. I took a deep breath and knocked on my son's door, the same way I'd knocked on his bedroom door countless times when he was growing up. 3 quick raps with my knuckles. I heard footsteps, a pause, and then the sound of the lock turning, and that's when everything changed. The door swung open. Daniel stood there, cell phone pressed to his ear, his expression shifting from distraction to recognition. He held up one finger. "Wait," while he finished his call. "Yeah, I'll have those projections to you by morning. No problem. Talk tomorrow." He ended the call and slipped the phone into the pocket of what looked like expensive slacks. "Mom, Dad, you made it." Martha stepped forward to hug him. I stayed where I was, suddenly aware of my weathered jeans and flannel shirt, the clothes of a farmer standing on the doorstep of a man who'd left that life behind. "Come on in," Daniel said, stepping back. "Rebecca's just finishing up dinner." We followed him into a house that looked like something from a magazine, open floor plan, gleaming hardwood, artwork on walls that had never seen a water stain. The smell of something garlicky and rich filled the air, making my stomach remember we'd only eaten fast food on the drive up. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a pristine white apron. "Martha, Thomas, welcome." Her smile seemed genuine enough, but there was something tight around her eyes. "The kids are upstairs finishing homework. They'll be down soon." Daniel gave us a brief tour. Living room, dining room, kitchen, half bath downstairs. "And you'll be in the guest room upstairs," he said, gesturing to the staircase. "I'll help with your bags after dinner." It was all so polite, so proper, so different from our home, where the door was always open to neighbors, where mud on the floor was a sign of honest work, where conversation flowed easily around our scratched kitchen table. Dinner was some kind of pasta dish I couldn't pronounce. The grandkids, Emma, 14, and Tyler, 11, joined us, both glued to their phones until Rebecca sharply cleared her throat. They looked up, mumbled hellos, then resumed typing with their thumbs under the table. "So," Daniel said, filling his wine glass, "have you thought about what comes next, after you get the insurance settlement?" I pushed the pasta around my plate. "Not sure there's enough to rebuild. Land might be worth something still, but you could always sell," Rebecca interjected. "Start fresh somewhere else." Martha's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "That land had been in my family for 4 generations. We're still processing everything," Martha said diplomatically. "It's been a difficult time." "Of course," Daniel nodded. "That's why you're here, to take some time to figure things out." But I could tell from the way he said it that sometime had an expiration date. That first night, Martha and I lay side by side in the guest bed, surrounded by decorative pillows that served no purpose except to end up on the floor. "It was nice of them to take us in," Martha whispered in the dark. "It was," I agreed, though the words felt hollow. Taking in family shouldn't feel like charity. Days passed, then weeks. Daniel went to work early and came home late. Rebecca maintained her precise schedule of yoga classes, volunteer work, and children's activities. The kids existed in their separate world of schools and screens. Martha and I felt like ghosts haunting someone else's house. I tried to make myself useful, fixing a leaky faucet, oiling the squeaky garage door, but Rebecca always seemed unsettled by my projects. "We have people we call for that," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm. One evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "How long do you think they'll stay?" Rebecca's voice was hushed but clear. "I don't know. Dad's still waiting on the insurance. Mum says he barely talks about it." Daniel sounded tired. "It's been almost a month, Dan. The kids need their space back. Emma's been complaining about sharing the bathroom. What am I supposed to do? They're my parents. They lost everything. I know that, and I feel terrible. But we agreed this would be temporary. Just give it a little more time. Please?" There was a silence, then the sound of a cabinet closing. I crept back upstairs before they could discover me. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I went downstairs for water and found Tyler at the kitchen counter, illuminated by the glow of his laptop. "Shouldn't you be asleep, buddy?" I asked. He startled, then relaxed. "Working on my science project. It's due tomorrow." I peered over his shoulder. "Solar system, huh?" "Yeah, boring." I smiled. "Did I ever tell you about how your dad and I used to lie in the fields at night and name all the constellations?" Tyler looked up, interested for the first time. "Dad knows constellations." "Sure does. Taught him myself. My father taught me, and his father taught him. Dad never talks about the farm." I pulled up a stool. "Want me to tell you about it?" For the next hour, I told Tyler stories of his father as a boy, fishing in the creek, helping with the harvest, the time he built a treehouse that collapsed under him. Tyler laughed, asked questions. It was the most connected I'd felt since the hurricane. The next morning, Tyler bounded into the kitchen. "Dad, Grandpa told me about the treehouse you built that fell apart." Daniel froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips. Something passed across his face, embarrassment, annoyance. That was a long time ago. "He said you guys used to look at stars all the time. Can we do that?" "We don't really have fields here, Ty. Too much light pollution anyway." "We could drive somewhere." "Maybe someday," Daniel said dismissively. "Get your backpack, we're running late." After they left, Rebecca approached me. "Thomas, I know you mean well, but please don't fill the kids' heads with all that. Daniel's worked very hard to give them a different kind of life. Different, better." The words she didn't say hung in the air between us. That afternoon I sat with Martha on the back patio. "We can't stay here," I said finally. "Where would we go?" Her voice quavered. "I don't know, but we don't belong here." Martha took my hand. "Just a little longer, please, until we hear from the insurance." I agreed, but that night I lay awake thinking about the farm. Not just the buildings and the land, but what it represented. Independence, heritage, honest work. Everything I'd tried to instill in Daniel. Everything he'd rejected when he left. The next morning, the insurance check arrived in the mail that had been forwarded to Daniel's address. It was less than half of what I'd hoped for, not enough to rebuild, barely enough to start over somewhere modest. Martha and I sat at the dining room table, staring at the check. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Daniel was home early. He walked in, suit jacket over his arm, looking tired. "Dad," he said, setting his briefcase down, "we need to talk." I recognized the tone in my son's voice. It was the same one I used when I needed to have a difficult conversation with someone, firm, resolved, but with forced gentleness around the edges. Martha's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight enough that I felt her wedding band press into my skin. "Insurance check came," I said, sliding the envelope toward him. Daniel glanced at it but didn't pick it up. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about." He sat down across from us, folded his hands on the table. "Rebecca and I have been discussing your situation." Your situation. Like our lives were a problem to be solved. "We think it might be best if you started looking into senior living communities." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Martha's grip tightened. "Senior living," I repeated. "We're not invalids, Daniel." "I didn't say you were. But you're both in your 70s. Rebuilding a farm from scratch, it doesn't make sense. These communities have activities, medical care on site. You'd have company your own age." "Our own age," Martha echoed softly. "You know what I mean," Daniel said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "Look, the insurance money could cover a deposit on a nice place. I've done some research. There's one about 20 minutes from here. You could have your own apartment but still be close to us, to the grandkids." I studied my son's face, trying to find the boy I'd raised in the man sitting before me. The boy who used to follow me around the farm, asking questions about everything. The boy who'd cried when his pet chicken died, who'd stayed up all night with a sickly calf, who'd helped deliver a foal one spring morning before school. "We're farmers, Daniel," I said finally. "We've lived on that land all our lives." "The land is gone, Dad." His voice was gentle but firm. "It's underwater, the house is destroyed. You can't go back to that life. It's time to be realistic." realistic, like my life's work had been some kind of fantasy. "We'll think about it," Martha said, always the peacemaker. Daniel nodded, looking relieved that at least one of us was being reasonable. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Around midnight, I went downstairs and found myself drawn to the backyard. The suburban night was nothing like the country darkness I knew. Here, ambient light from street lamps and neighbors' houses created a perpetual twilight. The stars were faint, washed out. I heard the sliding door open behind me. Daniel stepped out, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt from some corporate retreat. "Can't sleep?" he asked, joining me on the patio. "Too much on my mind," I replied. We stood in silence for a moment, looking up at the muted stars. "I'm trying to help, Dad," he said finally. "I know you don't see it that way. You think putting us in a facility is helping? It's not a facility. It's a community, with people who can look after you if something happens. We look after each other." "We always have," Daniel sighed, "until you can't anymore. Then what? You want Mom to take care of you when you get sick? Or me to quit my job to come down to Louisiana?" His words stung because they touched on fears I'd had myself. I wasn't young anymore. The work was getting harder each year, even before the hurricane. "I'm not trying to insult you," Daniel continued. "I'm trying to be practical. You taught me that. Planning ahead, thinking through consequences." "Nah, I taught you a lot of things," I said quietly. "About family, about roots, about standing by your own." He was quiet for a long moment. "I remember when Grandpa got sick," he said finally. "How it nearly broke you, trying to run the farm and care for him at the same time. How stubborn he was about accepting help. I swore I'd never put my family through that." The memory hit me like a physical blow. My father, once strong as an oak, reduced to confusion and pain in his final years. The way he'd fought every suggestion, every attempt to make things easier, the way I'd resented his stubbornness, even as I understood it. Was that how Daniel saw me now? A stubborn old man refusing the inevitable. "I'm not my father," I said, but the words lacked conviction. "No," Daniel agreed. "You're not. You're smarter than he was, more adaptable." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I'd been missing. Behind the corporate exterior, behind the frustration, was genuine concern. He wasn't trying to discard us. In his own way, filtered through his own values, he was trying to protect us. "We can't stay here forever," I acknowledged. "But a retirement community, that's not us, Daniel." "Then what? What's the plan?" The question hit me square between the eyes. What was the plan? For the first time since the hurricane, I forced myself to think beyond loss, beyond nostalgia, beyond pride. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I need to figure it out on my own terms." Daniel nodded slowly. "Fair enough, but let me help. Not with my solution, with yours. Whatever that turns out to be." Something shifted between us then. Subtle, but significant. Not agreement exactly, but understanding. The following week, Martha and I drove to Louisiana to survey the land one last time. The water had receded, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Mud where gardens had been, debris tangled in the remaining trees, the foundation of our home like the fossil of some ancient creature. Standing there, I finally accepted what Daniel had been trying to tell me. We couldn't go back. Not to this, but moving forward didn't have to mean surrendering everything we valued. On the drive back to Virginia, Martha and I talked, really talked, about what we wanted for our remaining years. Not what we'd lost, but what we could still build. When we returned, I asked Daniel and Rebecca to sit down with us. "We're not moving into a retirement community," I said firmly. Martha nodded beside me. Daniel started to object, but I held up my hand. "Let me finish. We've decided to sell the farmland. It's still valuable, even after the flooding. Between that and the insurance, we have enough to buy a small place of our own. There's a little house for sale about 10 miles from here. It's got nearly an acre of land, enough for a decent garden, maybe a few chickens. You want to stay in Virginia?" Daniel looked surprised. "We want to be near family," Martha said. "Near you, near the grandkids. But we need our own space, our own home." Rebecca spoke up, her voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "I think that sounds wonderful." Over the next month, things moved quickly. The Louisiana property sold to a developer for more than we expected. We closed on the little Virginia house. Nothing fancy, but solid, with good bones and rich soil. Daniel helped with the paperwork, the logistics. Rebecca helped Martha pick out new curtains, new dishes to replace what had been lost. The day we moved in, the whole family came to help. Tyler and I planted a vegetable garden in the backyard. Emma and Martha arranged photos, salvaged from the flood, on the mantel. Daniel built shelves in the garage for my tools. Rebecca brought a homemade casserole for dinner. That evening, as twilight settled over our new home, I sat on the porch with Daniel. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, more visible here than in his subdivision, though still not as brilliant as they'd been in Louisiana. "It's not the farm," Daniel said, following my gaze upward. "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's a good foundation." He nodded, understanding what I meant. Not just the house, but what we were rebuilding between us. "You know," he said after a while, "I've been thinking about taking Tyler camping sometime. Thought maybe you might want to come along, show him those constellations properly." I felt something warm expand in my chest. I'd like that. Inside, I could hear Martha laughing with Rebecca and Emma. The sound of family, not perfect, not always in harmony, but together, resilient. The hurricane had swept away my farm, my home of 4 decades. It had forced me to knock on my son's door and hear words that had cut deep. "We already have our own family. My wife doesn't want elderly people in the house." Words spoken in frustration, regretted almost immediately, but revealing a truth we'd needed to face. Now, sitting on the porch of a home that was modest but ours, watching the stars emerge with my son beside me, I understood something I'd been too proud to see before. A foundation isn't just concrete and timber. It's not just land passed down through generations. It's the willingness to begin again, to adapt, to forgive, to build something new on the ruins of what came before. The hurricane had taken much from us, but in its aftermath, between loss and rebuilding, my son and I had found our way back to each other, different men than we'd been, but family still, and that, I realized, was a foundation that even the fiercest storm couldn't wash away.